Field Vision Sports presents The Matchup with Sasha Bushka.
Kyler Murray kind of looks like a little kid running from his parents when he scrambles in the pocket.
Scott Bushka.
I had to tell my daughter that today wasn't really about her first day of school. It was really about me and the launch of our company.
And Cody Alexander.
Randomly, no. As somebody who's been around football my entire life, I literally can say that I've never smelled smelling salts, nor have I ever seen anybody actually have smelling salts. I'm sure that they were used at some point.
Like, share, and subscribe.
Welcome in to The Matchup by Field Vision Sports. Excited to have you here for episode 24 of The Matchup, coming off of week 15, heading into week 16 of the NFL season. I'm your host, Sasha Bushka, joined by Cody Alexander, the head of football ops, and the Beth Dutton of Field Vision Sports, Scott Bushka. Fellas, how we feeling today?
Doing great.
Yellowstone finale, did you catch it, Scott?
What?
Did you catch the Yellowstone finale?
I caught the Yellowstone finale. I am quite flattered by that introduction. I think Beth Dutton is a badass. And I'm just trying to figure out whose death I'm trying to avenge in the proverbial like NFL season of Field Vision. Yeah, I don't know. I'll have to think about that. I'll get back to you all by the end of the pod.
Sounds good. Sounds good. We've got a big show planned. We're going to talk a little bit about the favorites to win the Super Bowl in each conference. We'll go over Felix's power rankings as always. Look at kind of the 5 games that matter this week, or the 5 games involving a couple of playoff contenders. Talk about which we like best, and we'll finish it off with the picks. So I'm just going to jump right into it, fellas. We'll start in the NFC. Detroit loses a game to Buffalo this weekend. They've been kind of the presumed NFC favorite to go to the Super Bowl for quite a while now. They were on a long win streak, lost week 2. This is their first loss since then. Meanwhile, the Eagles are over here. I think have won 10 in a row, and the Vikings are now sitting with the same record as both of those teams at 12-2. So given what we know so far, currently, who do you think's the favorite to come out of the NFC to the Super Bowl?
I'll let you go, Scott.
Oh, I was going to let you go so I could have some time to think about it. I before I answer the question, which gives me time to think while I'm talking, I found both of those games very surprising. Like you guys know, I've been on the Detroit train for quite some time. I think that offense is so good. I love the way they run the ball. Their offensive line is better than anyone else in the leagues, and Ben Johnson is a offensive mastermind. They might just be 1 or 2 or 6 too many injuries on defense to compete, right? And I get it. It's Josh Allen and the Bills. He's hard to stop regardless. But Aleem McNeil, Carlton Davis, they have another couple starters go down on Sunday against the Bills, and I'm just worried about their ability to stop anyone, right? Like if you put them up against Philadelphia, can they stop Philadelphia's offense and the run and play man defense against AJ Brown? Like they can't. So yeah, I think I have to go with Philadelphia right now, but here is actually my real take is that I think the NFC it's a 4-team race where, my opinion, any of those teams can win. You got Detroit, Philadelphia, Minnesota, Green Bay. All 4 of those teams can beat each other. It's going to come down to matchups. So I know that's not a real answer, but like Detroit gets healthy, gets a couple guys back on defense. Like you can't tell me that they can't win a couple playoff games.
Yeah, I mean, I think actually we saw a mirror of 2 teams playing each other in Buffalo and the Lions. If you actually go back and you look, okay, who are the best? Because I'm a big believer in momentum into the playoffs, being able to play good at the end of the season, being ready to go into the playoffs. If you go and you look at it defensively, what are the 2 leading teams in either division that's had just massive attrition on the defensive side? It's been the Bills and it's been the Lions. I mean, they literally were a mirror of each other. And I think the better quarterback ended up winning. right? That Josh Allen, I think we can all say, is probably a better quarterback than Jared Goff. He just adds more to it. He's basically Superman out there. If you look at that in terms of the last 4 weeks, the Lions defense has just dropped tremendously, especially in rushing. They really can't stop anybody running the ball. In fact, they're like 31st in the last 4 weeks. I think the Panthers are worse than they are. And where it's on the opposite for the Bills. In fact, their passing defense has really began to struggle. So to me, when I look at it, who is a team that's primed? I think that there's weird things going on in the Eagles. I just have a problem. I don't necessarily trust Sirianni. I mean, he's trying to fight Clint Hurt on the sideline. There's stuff going on. I think that's you talk about a system that has probably an oligarchy running it. I don't know what Sirianni does. I think if Vic Fangio is by far the head coach of the defense. Kellen Moore's calling the offense. I don't know how much Sirianni has it. How much? I mean, he's calling maybe timeouts and maybe challenges. I just have a hard time believing that. I think what you got to ask yourself there is how good do you think that this Packers offense is? Because the defense in the last 4 weeks has become a top 5 defense. It's become elite. But it's like, do you trust Jordan Love? We saw this last year, this kind of growth. We kind of wondered where it was at the beginning of the season. But if you really look at it, I like the Packers. I think the Packers out of all 4 of those teams, the Packers have the talent and they have the best offense and the best defense heading into the last month of the season.
What's interesting, Cody, in listening to you talk through that is like, of those 4 teams, on the Lions, you don't trust the defense.
Right.
I agree with you on the run defense. At the start of the season, you would have said Detroit always stops the run, but you can throw all over them. So Lions, you don't trust the defense. On Vikings, you don't trust the quarterback, even though he's been really good. Like, that's what people are going to say. That's what they have said all year. So to me, that's a big question mark. On the Eagles, you don't trust the head coach, right? And basically, like, if you get in a close game, you're worried that Sirianni's gonna mess it up. The Packers are probably the only team where you're like, I trust the head coach, I trust the quarterback / offense, and their defense is getting better. So you might be right that that's the team that you trust the most to not have a major flaw.
Yeah, and to me, that's what it is. I think, too, the Packers are young everywhere. So the reason why they've kind of been put to the back burner is that people don't trust them because it's a bunch of 25-year-olds going into the playoffs, and they don't have a big veteran presence. But I just think if you look at the growth of this, they're rolling at the right time. I think LaFleur has figured out the offense. I think he's running the ball, which has been a staple of that system. It takes the pressure off of Love. I think with the Eagles, the Eagles are the ones where if it wasn't for the head coach and all the circus that comes outside of it, that's who you would have. They have meteoric rise on defense. The offense is solid, right? They have Barkley, they have the star power, but I just see a situation where it's the Eagles, it's a rematch of the Eagles Packers, and it goes down to a game management decision or a special teams decision, and it ends up the Packers. Matt LaFleur is the one that's going to win that out. To me, that's where I come for those two.
One thing to look at is, as you're looking at those 4 teams, is obviously 3 of them come out of the same division.
Mm-hmm.
The Lions, the Vikings, and the Packers, which means 2 out of those 3 teams are going to be wild cards, and they're going to be going on the road throughout. Whereas the Eagles are sitting over here on an island. At worst, they're going to get the 2 seed, and they'll at least have home games up until the NFC Championship game. And there's also a high likelihood there's a lot of division games left in the North. All of those teams take on 1 more loss, and the Eagles end up as the 1 seed.
Right.
Then you have a bye in 2 home games. So I think based on that alone, you maybe give the Eagles a little bit of an edge right now. The fact that the other 3 teams are going to beat up on each other, and 2 of them are going to be wild cards. But I agree. There's for a team that's won 10 games in a row, there's a lot of dissent in Philadelphia. You got the defensive line coach holding Nick Sirianni back from Jalen Carter during the game. Just the week before last, AJ Brown is pissed that he's not getting enough balls, so they kind of go away from Saquon this last week and get it to AJ Brown, and Was that a good thing? Maybe. But, and then also AJ Brown, he left that game with a little bit of an injury. I haven't heard much coming back out of that, so he must be okay. But the Eagles are probably the Eagles and the Packers. I guess everyone but Detroit is the most intact of that bunch in terms of injuries and not having as many. But from a talent perspective, you would have said Detroit and the Eagles are in a class of their own heading into the season before all the injuries. Now that Detroit has all the injuries, I kind of put the Eagles a step above those other teams. It's interesting because the Vikings, if like they have a good defense, they have all the weapons on offense, they have everything you want except probably 4th out of 4 in quarterbacks out of those teams. But why do we trust Jordan Love more than we should? I guess is the question I would ask.
I mean, I think that they've mitigated. I mentioned that earlier. I think they've mitigated a lot of his kind of like home run hitter mentality by running the ball. So, I mean, I think that that's kind of where Matt LaFleur's kind of said, okay, I got to cool it off. He can't just be throwing the ball 30, 40 times a game.
If I trust Jordan Love more than I do Sam Darnold, I trust both of them more than I do Jalen Hurts.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's fair. And Hurts has like because of the style they're playing. I mean, it's funny because the Packers and the Eagles have both basically done the same thing with the running the ball. Is like these quarterbacks are turning it over way too much. We've got to run the ball and like limit the turnovers. And Jalen Hurts has been a lot better with that this year for the Eagles. Early in the year when they lost a couple of games, he was turning it over at a really high clip. So if the Eagles get into a game where they get behind and like they have to throw their way back in it or anything like that, it doesn't spell good things for them, but that hasn't happened to them a lot this year. Let's switch gears over to the AFC. The Chiefs get I want to say a convincing win over the Browns. They did win by 2 scores, but they forced 6 turnovers, and like that's a game in the past where you expect the Chiefs to maybe score 35 or 40 points and win by 30. And they just won 21-7, but they moved to 13-1. The Bills go into Detroit and beat the Lions. Obviously the most impressive win of the weekend for any team. And then you have the Ravens sitting there who won easily this past weekend, but we know they're good front runners. Still have 5 losses on the season. And obviously the Steelers are lurking with only 3 losses. 4 now after losing to the Eagles this weekend. I think it comes down to 2 teams in my book, and that's the Bills and the Chiefs. But if you have a dissenting opinion, go ahead. Who do you guys see as the favorite for coming out of the AFC?
I think if Patrick Mahomes gets healthy, this doesn't become a lingering issue. I think that's who's going to end up there. I would love to say that the Bills, this is going to be the Bills' year, but until they actually prove it, it's going to be, you have to go with Mahomes. I mean, I hate saying that. I don't want to say that, but I think the offense for Buffalo is just playing just out of this world. They're off the charts. They're breaking every single chart that you can look at right now. But that defense really scares me, especially because it's the passing defense, not necessarily the run defense. It's the passing defense as we go into the playoffs. I just don't think that you want to build a playoff roster of wins that are 42-35, 42-40. That to me, that's just not sustainable.
Yeah, I think as excited as everyone is about Josh Allen, and he is playing at the height of his powers right now, and I do not disagree with all of the prognosticators who will say, like, right now Josh Allen is better than Patrick Mahomes. Like, if you watch them on Sunday, that's pretty clear, right?
Yeah.
It scares the hell out of me that the Bills have given up more than 40 points 2 straight weeks, right? The Lions is one thing. The Rams, they gave up 45 points to the Rams, who turned around and scored 12 against the San Francisco 49ers, right? So there are some flaws on that defense. To me, the Chiefs it's kind of binary. If they do what they're supposed to do, win 2 out of 3 games, and get home field advantage, they're the favorite. Because people forget that team hasn't had a bye since week 6, and they're an older team, right? They're a beat up team.
Yep.
If they can go out and win 2 games in 4 days, 2 games in 5 days, Saturday against the Texans, and then Wednesday, Christmas Day against the Steelers, they're off for a month, right? Like, they've got home field advantage, a first round bye. They wouldn't play till January 18th. So that's December 25th to January 18th. And what you give is Mahomes and Reed a shitload of time to game plan. You give Spags time to game plan. You give them time to get healthy. Like, if that happens, the Chiefs are the favorite. If somehow this Mahomes ankle is more than we think it is, if they lose 2 out of 3, which I don't think is likely, but certainly could happen, especially if you have Carson Wentz playing. I think this Chiefs team is flawed enough and tired enough that if they have to win 3 in a row and they have to end up going on the road to Buffalo, like, I would put Buffalo as the favorite.
So I'm going to ask you guys to play doctor for a second. So the Chiefs need to win 2 out of 3 to get the 1 seed. Mahomes is questionable for this Saturday. He's got a high ankle sprain. I think he's going to play just because he usually plays. But if you're the Chiefs, do you rest him now because he needs rest because he just got injured and he has and then you maybe put yourself in a situation where you have to win week 18? Or do you try to just win 2 games with him and then he has 24 days off before their first playoff game and don't rest him now? Like, where is the rest better served?
I 100 sorry, Cody, I'll just, because I have a strong opinion on this. I 100% think you try to get out of these 6 days with a win or with 2 wins, and then your whole team rests for a month. Only because we're not talking about an Achilles. We're not talking about a knee. We're not like, sure, he can hurt it worse, but it's still like, even if he rolled it again, if you have 23 days to recover, he'll be fine for the playoffs. So I will go on record as saying I think the Chiefs could beat the Texans playing Carson Wentz at quarterback. So one strategy is you rest him on Saturday, you play him on Christmas Day. But I think you just play him both days. You get it, like, you try to ask your defense to have good effort. You get out of like Christmas Day with 2 wins, and then you take a month off.
Yeah, this is a nightmare scenario, though, for the Chiefs, because if you go and you look at who the top 2 leaders in the NFL in sacks, it's Denver and Houston, right? And then we know what the Steelers can look like. We know, especially with TJ Watt. So, especially against the tackle situation that the Kansas City has. So, this is one of those, like, there is not a good answer. I think you need to beat the Texans. So if Mahomes can play, I think you play him. And then you just say, look, if once we win, we're pretty much locked to get home field advantage. Then if we lose to the Steelers, fine. Steelers, I think that they can beat them. Even in Pittsburgh, I think they can still beat them on Christmas without Mahomes. And then you look, the Broncos, you just give them, you give them a win in Denver. To me, I think that's kind of the way that you have to look at it. You have to win this next game in order to really stay in front. So if he can play, I do agree with you though, Scott. If you had to pick, which one do you think that maybe they can't win without Mahomes? I would probably say you can probably beat Houston at home with Wentz, but Mahomes probably has to play in Pittsburgh against the Steelers just to make sure that you get that home field advantage. But like, this is a nightmare scenario. I mean, there's no good answer for this because it's these 3 teams that are all playoff teams that you got to play, and one happens to be in your division.
It's these 3 teams, and you're 6 days after the injury, and then 3 days after, like 3 days after that. It's like, it's a bad time for it to happen.
Yeah.
I'll say this. Vegas thinks Mahomes is going to play because the Chiefs went from plus 1.5 yesterday to now at last look, we're -3 against Houston, which I think, like, 100% healthy Mahomes, maybe you're -4 against Houston at home, but not much more than that. So I think Vegas is expecting that Mahomes plays and plays like himself.
What is also interesting for the Chiefs, which I don't think I think it just kind of played out like this. But if you think about the 3 teams they're going to play the next 3 weeks, Houston, Pittsburgh, and Denver, it's almost a certainty that they're going to be playing one of those 3 teams in their first playoff game as well. So there's a little bit of like, part of you wants to go to like, okay, Reed, Spags, like pull out all the stops to get these 2 wins to get yourself home field advantage, right? But you're going to turn around and play that team in a month in the playoffs. One of them, any of them. So I don't know. There's a little bit of cat and mouse of like how much you show them. Like I was thinking with Houston, it might almost be better to play Carson Wentz. You have like a different game plan. And then if you play them a month later, it's a totally different game.
Right.
Yeah. I will say this, Houston. Well, I'm trying to. I guess if 2, 3, and 4 all win, they could play. Houston's almost guaranteed to go in as the 4 seed, and so if the Chiefs are the 1, but if 2, 3, and 4 all win in the wild card round, then they'd play Houston in the first game of the playoffs. So
yeah. I guess I'm assuming Pittsburgh's going to be the 5. I'm assuming Baltimore's going to beat Pittsburgh on Saturday. Pittsburgh's going to be the 5. Denver's the 7. So they in the next 3 weeks in that scenario, they play the 4, the 5, and the 7. So the only team that's not in there that they could possibly play would be the Chargers.
Right.
Yeah. It's interesting, and it is a little bit of cat and mouse because I think in normal circumstances, we've talked about this in the past, Spags would go a little vanilla knowing that he was going to face him in the playoffs, but like, and maybe be able to still win the game with Mahomes being Superman and all that, but with him on a bum ankle, you might need more on defense to win it. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays off. I've added the man, the myth, the Mark Gastineau of Field Vision Sports, Felix Johnson, to the stage.
I'm gonna get my sack back, Bushka.
Dude, I'm not letting you get close to me.
Hey Scott, how you doing?
Let's. I'm glad Felix is here. He's got his Grambling Tigers shirt on today, which I like. It took me a second to figure out what tiger that was, but
real tigers in Louisiana.
There you go. Let's go over Felix's power rankings for the week and dissect those a little bit before we start looking ahead to next week's matchups. Nobody fell out of the rankings this week. Honorable mentions: the Washington Commanders and Arizona Cardinals. Commanders maybe could be working their way back in there. Number 10, Pittsburgh Steelers coming off the loss to the Eagles. Number 9, the Denver Broncos somehow won comfortably against the Colts, even though they were well down a lot of the game. Number 8, the Los Angeles Rams with that rousing 12-6 Thursday night victory. Number 7, the Baltimore Ravens with a convincing win over the Giants. Number 6, the Green Bay Packers. Number 5, the Minnesota Vikings. Number 4, the Detroit Lions falling from number 1. Number 3, the Philadelphia Eagles after beating the Steelers stay in the same spot. Number 2, the Buffalo Bills up from 5 after going into Detroit and winning. And number 1, the Kansas City Chiefs 13-1 beat the Browns 21-7 this weekend. Felix, first of all, I'll let you go first this time. Any caveats or anything you want us to know about how you ranked these teams this week?
No. I mean, I like how the teams play, and particularly this time of the year. Excuse me. I noticed that most of the teams that are going to be good are good, and they're going to beat up on the other teams. Like even the Packers going on Sunday night, like with the Seahawks. Yeah, we kind of knew the Packers were going to win that game. Maybe not as convincingly as it looked like it was going to be at first, but at this time of year, all the good teams have figured out that they're good and are winning the games they need to.
Cody, qualms.
Yeah, I don't see the Buccaneers on there. And I think that's a big thing. And look, it's not to your fault. I think we've all been sleeping on them, doing research before we came on the show. I know we talked about it pre-show. But if I told you that we had in the last month that we had the number 4 offense in the NFL and the number 2 defense in the NFL off of this top 10 in the last 4 weeks, you probably would be thinking that this is a bad list. And The reason why is just because they've been on a roller coaster. I can't figure out the defense. I don't know why some weeks it looks like they can't defend the seam, and then the next week they look like world beaters. And one week the pressures don't hit, and then the next week they do. But we do know that Baker Mayfield has been on a tear. I know that we've lost Godwin, but Evans is still there. They've got some talent. The McMillan kid has really played really well lately. So to me, if there's any qualm that I have on this, is like, we're probably not giving enough respect for the Buccaneers. That's a team that nobody, especially now that they've got Liam Cohen figuring out the run game, no one wants to play that team in the playoffs. Nobody.
Right. I think that's a big part of the Buccaneers and Liam Cohen and coming in and basically bringing over what made Baker look good for like a game or two or whatever it was with the Rams and Sean McVay, because Liam Cohen was the coordinator there. So it makes a lot of sense in what they're doing. But like you said, I think we all just kind of wrote off the Bucs this in the back of our head. I think the story in the NFC South is more about Kirk Cousins falling apart and the Falcons maybe not winning the division after it looked like they were going to be fine from the beginning of the year and before the year. And Tampa, I thought Tampa was going to win the division from the beginning of the year. And if you ask me who my favorite non-Chiefs quarterback was, it'd be Baker Mayfield, because he's, at this point, the guy's a top 10 quarterback, because we've seen 2 years of very solid, consistent, and even at times great play. And even when you would have told me that when Baker got cut from Cleveland, that would have been the craziest thing in the world at the time.
Yeah. Now let me be the voice of reason here, though, Cody. You put someone in, you got to take someone out.
Right.
Who's it going to be?
Yeah, I mean, I get that. That's a problem. I'd probably take the Rams out. I know the Rams are scary. I still don't trust that defense. You're probably, you could argue that's probably the only team that you could take out. At least just having them even on an honorable mention.
Yeah,
I
would say that's the oversight, is the Bucs should at least be honorable mention.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I'll go with this. You talk about them on the rise. We all thought Atlanta for most of the year, okay, this is going to be Atlanta's going to figure it out. Then you had the Kirk Cousins drop off. What's even, coincidentally, their defense the last month has risen into top 10 level of play. So you talk about devastating for a franchise that it looked like they were going to make the playoffs. Now they got to pivot to a rookie quarterback. Unless he just lights the world on fire in the next 3 games, it's going to be really difficult for them to make the playoffs.
Yeah. Before we go to Scott's qualms, since this has come up and we didn't talk about it off the top, Michael Penix Jr. is getting set to enter as the Atlanta starting quarterback for Kirk Cousins, who has 1 touchdown pass in the last 5 games. So it's hard to say. Like, the way I would look at it is like Penix is a rookie coming in at the very end of the season. The chances that he's just like a world beater probably aren't that high. But at the same time, it would be hard for them to be worse than Cousins has been lately. And maybe you catch lightning in a bottle. So I think it's the right move for the Falcons. But I'd be interested if any of you disagree with that.
I mean, they're playing the Giants. They're at the Commanders, who is going to be difficult. Defenses play better, and then they finish with the Panthers on the last week. So if you can get his confidence going, I mean, you got 3 weeks to do it. Do I think that they can catch the Buccaneers? I don't. It's going to be really hard.
Yeah. Well, I don't think anybody would have expected Kirk Cousins to be this bad. But, I mean, when you realize that he was also the other quarterback coming off an Achilles tear like Aaron Rodgers was, it makes a lot of sense why he just didn't come back as well, because he's also one of the older quarterbacks in the league. But, Sasha, you remember the conversations we've had. I thought the Falcons should have drafted a pass rusher with that 8th overall pick. Mm-hmm. And it seems like they made the right decision with Michael Penix Jr. And, I mean, it just seems kind of wild, that front office in Atlanta. You had the foresight to sign Kirk Cousins, but also draft his replacement. So I'm just a little confused on what the philosophy is with Atlanta, where you're like, let's give him $100 million, but also he's not finishing the season for us. So we're going to be smart enough to draft his replacement. So it's just kind of a weird situation that they got themselves into, but it worked out for them.
I will say this about the NFC South race. The Falcons have 3 winnable games, and they have the tiebreaker over the Bucs. The Bucs have 3 winnable games as well, but they finished with 2 division games, Carolina and New Orleans. And New Orleans would love nothing more than to knock the Bucs out of the playoffs in week 18. last week of the season. Now, with no Derek Carr, that could be too tall of a task. But it wouldn't shock me if Carolina or New Orleans snuck up on the Bucs in these last 3 weeks. The question is, can Atlanta win 3 games in a row?
Right.
Yeah, they just if they were going to pull the plug on Cousins and put in a rookie quarterback, they probably should have done it earlier than when they needed to win 3 games in a row to go to the playoffs.
Yeah.
I mean, we Felix, you mentioned our good friend Aaron Rodgers. We spent some time talking about, or more appropriately saying, making fun of him, or talking about how much I have disdain for him before the pod started. I think Tom Brady and LeBron James, if we're honest, like, they fooled everyone into thinking that age doesn't matter, right? Like, you can, like, football is a young man's game, and Kirk Cousins is old, Aaron Rodgers is old. They're both coming off an Achilles injury, and it just, like, paying him that much money was a mistake. It just was. Yeah. And you said it worked out for them. It didn't work out for him.
I was talking more about the draft pick of Penix.
No, I know. But, like, the strategy of doing those two things together completely hampered their ability to build out the rest of their roster the way that they needed to, right? And so, yeah, I think it's the right move now. They should have done it several weeks earlier.
Yeah. The only thing I'll say is Cousins was playing pretty decent until this last 5-game stretch, and you don't pull the plug on a guy that's making $100 million because of a couple of bad games. But 5 games now constitutes more than a couple.
So. He had that 500-yard Monday night game, and we were like, all right, here we go, Kirk Cousins, and they're going to win that division and be a legit NFC team.
Yeah.
They're 6-3. Like, it's interesting because these two teams competing for the NFC South, the Bucs and the Falcons, have both had 4-game losing streaks at points this season. So, Scott, so weird, I'll let you rip apart the power rankings a little bit if you'd like.
Yeah, I'm not gonna belabor it too much. I think the top 7 are really all that matter, and they're the right top 7. And they're, to be honest with you, like, at this point in the season, week 16, like, those are the only 7 teams we should be talking about, in my opinion. You could maybe, and by the way, I think you have the right number 8 too, because you could maybe talk yourself in to throwing the Rams in that discussion. But in general, I think there's 7 teams that can win the Super Bowl, and they're the 7 teams that Felix has 1 through 7. My only issue is, like, I don't, other than you being a complete homer, I don't see how you can still have the Chiefs as the number 1 team. Like, say Sasha, you brought up the Chiefs game, 21-7, cool. They covered for the first time in 2 months. Any other team who got 6 turnovers that game would be like 48-7, right? And previous Chiefs teams that game would have been 48-7. Meanwhile, the Bills actually scored 48 points, right? And they just beat the Chiefs a couple weeks ago. So I don't know how you don't have the Bills and probably the Eagles over the Chiefs. I'm not saying that doesn't mean the Chiefs aren't a favorite in the playoffs. But as they exist right now, like, the Bills are better.
Well, that's hard for me to say because the Bills' defense over the last 2 weeks has allowed almost as many points as their offense has scored. And then with the Chiefs, I mean, we sit here and complain about them beating every team by 3 points. They finally beat a team by 14, and we kind of moved the goalposts a little bit. I get it. It's the Browns, but they also had 6 turnovers. Their defense hadn't been as good in, like, the last month. Well, they returned to being phenomenal on Sunday. And Jameis Winston, for what it is, I know it's Jameis Winston, but they got 6 turnovers. They sat down Jameis Winston at, like, the beginning of the 4th quarter when it was still kind of a game and brought in Dorian Thompson-Robinson. Chiefs defense still got another interception on him. So the defense is back to being what it is. I think it's more about the defense being as dominant as it was. And if the offense, and then I know with the Mahomes injury, where we just talked about that and how devastating that might be, but if they're kind of on the same wavelength, how Mahomes and the offense has been playing over the last month and the defense played on Sunday and how we know they can play, that's still the scariest team in football. And they were the number 2 team in football last week, and they won by 14. It's hard to say that they're going to move down or up that much when Detroit lost too.
I'm torn on the Chiefs if I'm looking at it objectively, because they're 13-1, which is, like, not just great for this season, and the best record in the NFL this season. Like, you don't see very many 13-1 teams in the NFL, and so that's a big deal. And context matters with everything, and there's a lot of stats that you can throw out and point out that would tell you the Chiefs are one of the worst 13-1 teams of all time. Like, if you just look at other 13-1 teams and point differential and like how much they win games by, you could make that argument pretty easily. But any other team that you put on that list to look at bad 13-1 teams, if that is even a thing, also didn't win the last 2 Super Bowls.
Mhm.
And that's the context that matters. You can't tell me the back-to-back defending Super Bowl champs are the worst ever of their record, because they've proven that they know how to win games. And so that's what, like, it's hard to parse out. Like, they don't look like the best team right now, but a lot of people would also still pick them to win the Super Bowl, or at least get to the Super Bowl. And we even talked about it at the beginning of the show. Like, if they get home field advantage, which they probably will, you would have them as the favorite to come out of the AFC. So there's just a lot of moving parts with evaluating the Chiefs right now.
Well, and I think I said it after the Panthers game. I don't think there's a team in the league that the Chiefs can't beat by 3 points. Doesn't matter who it is. Like, even they lost to the Bills, but here in a few weeks in the playoffs, we could be sitting here saying like, oh yeah, they beat them by 3 points, and we're not shocked. And they also could beat the Panthers by 3 points, and it's just as impressive of a win because it's the same win.
Yeah, I agree with everything you're saying. So a month from now, Chiefs Bills Arrowhead AFC Championship game. Chiefs are favored by 0.5 points, let's just say. How much of your DraftKings account are you putting on it? Are you comfortable betting on the Chiefs? Or who are you betting on?
Every dime of it, because Patrick Mahomes has never lost to Josh Allen in the playoffs ever.
So yeah. And I think that's solid. That's a solid ground to stand on. I say this sometimes, but if you only predict things that you've already seen happen before, you'll never predict anything until after it happens. And so that's like, it's another way of saying it's already happened. It hasn't happened until it happens.
Well,
So the Bills,
I even think more so to that point, in any playoff game, the Chiefs haven't lost a playoff game in 2 years. And so like and they've rarely lost a game in a year and a half. So it's like, it's kind of hard to pick them pick against them in any game.
Yeah, I don't disagree, especially when it's a playoff game. A little bit of it will matter, like how healthy is Mahomes at that time. He should be pretty healthy. And how do they look in their first playoff game if it does come down to an AFC Championship game? Like, if they come out in their first playoff game and it looks like Chiefs playoff team as usual, then people are going to be on the Chiefs over the Bills. And I guess if they come out in their first playoff game and don't look good, they might not even be there. So
if you get, I know we need to move on. If you get Jalen Watson back, Hollywood Brown back, potentially DJ Humphrey back, and by the way, Charles Omenihu has already made a pretty big difference to the pass rush over the past couple of weeks. Like that's part of the story with the defense. Mm-hmm. And it's the point I made earlier. If the Chiefs can win 2 games in the next week and then allow themselves to get healthy, like you're not going to want to play that team.
Yeah, no. I concur. That's our power ranking segment. Felix, we're going to take you off stage after the break. So any last words for the audience?
No, I love Scott. I just want him to know.
It's a budding rivalry here at Field Vision Sports, Scott.
And I'm winning it. It's not really much of a rivalry. I'm 2-0.
Listen, I feel like the listeners should know that Felix and I have made 2 bets over the last 2 weeks, and Felix has won both of them. We're now going to make this a tradition where we place a bet every week. I don't know what it is, Felix, but we'll find one, and I guarantee I'm winning it this week.
I mean, guarantees are strong. You're 0-2. You have 0 wins, and I'm betting 1,000. So,
yeah, it's kind of like the Chiefs versus the Bills in the playoffs. All right, on the other side of the break, we're gonna go over
exactly.
We're gonna go over the the best games of the week, the games with playoff implications. Get your locked and loaded for week 16 and make some picks. You're listening to the Matchup by Field Vision Sports. We'll be right back. You know what? I just figured out.
We'll keep the time in the corner. It'll be fine.
I just figured out today that there's like a spot where you can pause the recording, which I could just do, and then that would take all your power away, Felix.
That would suck though. That's not fun for any of us.
Welcome back into the Matchup by Field Vision Sports. Excited to have you with us for part 2 of episode 24 with Scott and Cody. All right, fellas, week 16's ahead. 3 games left for all teams. There's basically 5 games this weekend that like have implications for both sides. It's Thursday night, Denver, LA. Then Saturday, 2 games. Houston and Kansas City, Pittsburgh and Baltimore. And then you've got Philly and the Commanders and Minnesota, Seattle. Both teams, or Seattle fighting for their playoff lives, Minnesota fighting to try to get that 1 seed. Of those 5 games, which one do you think has the most implications for what's going to happen in the playoffs this year?
Well, I think the Pittsburgh-Baltimore game. I mean, winner wins the North. I think Denver Chargers, you can just flip them. I mean, they still got to kind of finish out their season 2. Houston is going to win their division, so that one doesn't really matter. Philly, Washington. I don't. Do we really think Washington is a legitimate contender at this point? I think Philly is. I know that we've talked about the dysfunction, but I just think they're just a better team. And then Minnesota is not a great matchup for Seattle. So to me, I think that's the game. Pittsburgh, Baltimore. That's the game that has the most implications.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue that Minnesota Seattle has more wide-ranging implications on the total NFC playoff picture, because I mean, you've all of a sudden got a 3-way tie up top there at 12-2 for the 1 seed. And so I know people love to discount Minnesota, but I would like they could be the 1 seed in the NFC. So they obviously they can't lose if they want to continue to stay in that race. But then Seattle, you've got Seattle in a tight race in the NFC West. And so, I mean, the way I think about the Pittsburgh-Baltimore game a little bit is like, it matters to them because you're just going to flip them depending on which way the game goes. But it doesn't matter to the rest of the playoff picture. Whereas like Minnesota, Seattle could have a lot of implications on like where all those teams end up.
Yeah, I will say this about the Thursday night game is like Denver, LA feels like it's just like a couple of wild card teams that are fighting for the 6 and 7. But the Chargers need to win because if the Chargers lose that game, it brings all those 6 and 8 teams into play. The Colts, Dolphins, Bengals are all 6 and 8. Any one of them wins this weekend, they're 7 and 8. The Chargers lose, they're 8 and 7, and now they've got to win one of their last 2 games to make the playoffs. Whereas if the Chargers beat Denver, that's pretty much a wrap for the AFC playoff picture. Like we know who's going in.
Right.
You're making my Chargers -2.5 bet feel better every day.
Yeah, that's fair.
Because Cody's making it feel worse every day.
I just, I'm trying not to be a homer, but at the same time, I'm looking and I'm like, I don't know. That defense, that defense has kind of tailed off in the last couple of weeks, and it's just, I don't know. We'll see. I think it's going to be a really, really tight game on Thursday.
Let me ask you this: regardless of how much playoff implications there are or aren't, and like I could make the argument that like Houston, KC has the least. Because KC's got to really stumble not to get the 1, and Houston's going to win their division regardless. So it feels big, especially if you're a Chiefs fan, but it's probably not as big as it seems. But regardless of the playoff implications, which of those games are you most excited about? Which one do you think will be the best game?
Of these, I actually think that Philly-Washington game probably be the most fun to watch. I think the Thursday night game is just going to be a slugfest. It's going to be just who doesn't make a mistake. Houston, Kansas City, Mahomes isn't playing. If he does play, how injured is he going to be? That's not exciting. I really think Baltimore is going to handle Pittsburgh. They're a better quality team. So like looking at, and I don't think the matchup with Minnesota and Seattle, that's not a very good matchup for Seattle. So I think the Philly Commanders game could be the most exciting.
Cody, you think it's a bad matchup for Seattle or a bad matchup for Minnesota?
I think it's a bad matchup for Seattle. I don't think Seattle, look, the one thing, and I think we've talked about this multiple times on the show. The one thing that Seattle can't do is abandon the run game. And they're going to have to abandon the run game against the Vikings. Yeah, and I know that the Vikings have kind of cooled off on the run front in recent weeks, but I just think that Flores knows against this team, if I just go ahead and pack the box and they can't run, I'm going to put it in Geno. Geno Smith's going to have to throw the ball 45 times with the way that we're rushing the passer. I just don't think that that's a great matchup for Seattle.
It's going to be bad news for Cody when he gets to explaining his picks in that Seattle +3 versus Minnesota pick.
I think it will be close. I think Seattle's defense is legit. I think it's going to be close. I just think offensively, we're looking at a team. Can we go and can we score enough points to win? I just don't think offensively that's a really good matchup. I probably should have been more. I see where you're going with that, Scott. I should have been more direct on where I'm focused on that. Offensively, I don't think that's a good matchup. I also don't think it's a great matchup for the Vikings on offense. I think this is going to be another slugfest. Again, kind of similar to the Denver LA, where you're looking at it's like Spider-Man looking at each other.
Yeah, I think to the original question, I think the Chiefs-Texans game has the chance to be really good. Just because we know the Chiefs' propensity to play close games. And I think Mahomes is going to play, but I also think he's going to be hobbled. And you're going to see the Chiefs and Reed do some different things to try to protect him. So anyways, I think that has the potential to be a game that comes down to the wire like every Chiefs game does.
Yeah. It's the Philly-Washington game is interesting because it's a divisional matchup. And the division's not really in question, but both teams have a lot to play for because the Commanders are sitting in the 7th spot right now, with a couple of teams lurking behind them. So they still need to do some work to get that last wild card spot. And then obviously Philly competing for the 1 seed, but really a lot of good matchups in a week 16 scenario.
Yeah. I think you're crazy. I understand why you and Vegas and everyone else think so, but I think you're crazy to think the Ravens are just going to waltz in and run all over the Steelers. Like, I know recency bias, like Steelers had a rough game against Philadelphia last week, but Steelers for the most part handled them and their offense a few weeks ago when they played. And I just think like these teams always play a field goal game. So that one feels like it's going to be closer than you think.
The Pickens injury is a big problem for the Steelers. And I don't know if he's I agree coming back, but it showed up big time against the Eagles. Let's make some picks. Let's wrap this up tighty. Cody, we're going to start with you this week. We need a prop bet, an over-under, and a game pick for this weekend.
All right, my prop is going to be golf under 265.5 against the Bears. Bears secondary is still really good. They're going to be able to run. They're going to want to keep that game clean. And I just think I think they're going to. It's a divisional opponent. They're coming off of a loss. They're going to want to get back to basics. So I think golf goes under. I still like that Bears secondary. The run defense is abysmal, but I do like that secondary. I'm going to take the Rams and Jets over. I think both of those offenses are playing really well right now. I think both of that goes over 46.5. And then Scott pointed out earlier, I think Seattle covers the +3. I think this is a really close game. This is kind of one of those games that comes down like 21-20, something like that, with Minnesota winning. Minnesota's been kind of skirting through. I think it's not a great matchup for either offense.
What's the over-under on that game?
Oh, I gotta look it up.
Seems like you're telling me to hammer the under.
Yeah, this would be a game that I would definitely take the under on.
It
I
looks
just
like
think
it's 42.5. So
Yeah.
Vegas kind of agrees that it'll be a little bit of a slugfest. I'll go next. I'll let Scott close us out this time. I'll take Tyler Algier over 43. I think like they're going to try to take the pressure off of Penix in his first game starting. And obviously you could go Bijan Robinson there, but I also don't think like, and Bijan Robinson would be a fine pick, but I don't think he gets all of the work with the rookie quarterback starting. They're not going to give him any more work than they usually do, which opens the door for Algier to get some carries in this game. So I'll go Tyler Algier instead of Bijan Robinson to go over his rushing total against the Giants in the Falcons-Giants game. I'll go Detroit -6.5. I think they're still way better than the Bears. Even though like they lost the game to the Bills, they barely beat the Bears on Thanksgiving. The Bears got hammered this last week against Minnesota. Detroit's defense has a lot of injuries, and this spread would be a lot bigger if they didn't. And so on that note, if Detroit's going to win by a touchdown or more, it's going to be because of their offense. And so I'll go Detroit, Chicago over 48. I think like Detroit probably gets to 35 by themselves, if not more. And so, I mean, Chicago's going to show up a little bit, and especially with the dinged up Detroit defense, I think both teams can score a little bit. So I'll go Detroit, Chicago over 48 points.
You love picking your game and your over under in the same game.
It happens from time to time. Yeah. And then you can same game parlay them, Scott.
Yeah, that always works.
Yeah, good point. Oh, I'll just point out to the audience that I'm 22-14 on the year. Scott and Cody, less so.
yes.
I was 2-1 again last week. I like going 2 out of 3. I'm looking for a 3-0 week this week, though.
How often are your 2-1 results losing one of those two that you picked on the same game?
Never. I always get the 2 on the same game and miss the other one.
Is that right? Is that true?
No, last week I lost the Cleveland +4, but I got the Chiefs Browns under 45 and Jordan Addison over 51.5.
Got it. Okay. All right. I'm not going to spend much time talking about my prop because it's the same premise as yours. I'm going Bijan Robinson over 78.5 rush yards against the Giants. Giants are 20th ranked in DVOA in rush defense. Falcons trying to take some pressure off Penix. I see the carries going to Bijan versus Algier because, quite frankly, like Bijan's been really good lately, and he's treated us well on overs for a while now. So give me Bijan over 78.5. I'm just going to go out on a limb and say I don't like either of my game picks that much, but I'm just going to roll with them. Give me a home dog in Carolina +4 against Arizona. I think Arizona's done. I think they had a nice run in the middle of the season. And I think stylistically, Arizona looks a little bit similar to what Philadelphia wants to do. And we saw Carolina play Philadelphia really well a couple weeks ago. So we all thought that Carolina was going to get their win against the Cowboys last week, but I still think that's an ascending team that's trying to win games. So give me Carolina covering 4 against the Cardinals. I think it's a field goal game. And then I am going to latch on to something that Cody said at the start of the podcast, which is that the number 2 ranked defense over the last 4 weeks is the Buccaneers. I think they've found something defensively. The other team that's found something defensively, and that one is much more obvious, Micah Parsons came back into the lineup. So I want the under on the Cowboys-Bucks game because it's a big number. It's 48.5. I think both of these defenses are playing better. And Dallas, since Dak's been out, since they've had Cooper Rush playing quarterback and Micah Parsons rushing the passer, they actually want to play low-scoring games. And so I think they get into a bit of a rock fight with the Bucks.
I like it.
Quick shout out on your Bijan analysis. Bijan Robinson has quietly had like the season that everyone was expecting him to last year. And not that he had a bad rookie season, but like he's made a step forward. He's number 2 in our threat ratings on the season for running backs, trailing only Saquon Barkley, just ahead of
Oh.
Derrick Henry and Jahmyr Gibbs. So
There
Bijan
you
Robinson's had a really great year. Scott has Bijan Robinson over 78.5, Carolina +4, and Bucks Cowboys under 48.5. Cody has Jared Goff under 265.5, Rams Jets over 46.5, and Seattle +3. And I have Tyler Algier over 43, Detroit -6.5, and Detroit Chicago over 48. Any last words for the listeners, fellas?
I'm just gonna. It's something I'm thinking about. Both you guys have wives. If you count intern B, both you guys have kids. I feel like the NFL and college are really setting us up for failure here because you got a Thursday night game, you got college football playoff Friday, you got 2 NFL games on Saturday, you got college football playoff Saturday, you got Sunday games, Monday night football, Christmas Day football. I'm really worried about my wife not being extremely upset at me during the holiday season. So just, everyone, maybe follow the game on your Field Vision app so you don't have to be watching the screen the whole time. I didn't mean for that to be an ad, but, you're going to have to get away from the TV. So find some ways to track it on your phone so you can do it, quietly in the corner as kids are opening presents.
It's a fair assessment. Luckily for me, you can count intern P if you want to, but he will be equally watching football as much as I am, so I don't have to worry about it as much.
Yeah, he places a better too.
He's been known to.
Or 50.
That's going to do it for podcast episode 24 of The Matchup. Check us out on X at FieldVisionMI, on Instagram at FieldVisionSports. Go to fieldvisionsports.com, download the app, follow the games live. We had a great time. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.
I got
Scott's
nothing.
gonna need an ice bath after this holiday foray of football.
Dude, I already need an ice
I
bath.
found a new trick too, Sasha.